To Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney from the nation's capital in Washington, D.C.
We're back, and it is a pleasure to say we have with us a very special guest. He is the guy who really is in charge of the investigative activities of one of the most important investigative entities in our country. And I'm not talking about the Federal Bureau of Investigations or anything in the government. I'm talking about one of the most powerful institutions outside of government in Washington, D.C., and that is, of course, Judicial Watch. His name is Chris Farrell. He has been with Judicial Watch for quite some time and is an extraordinary resource, as is his organization, perhaps in part because of what he brings to the job as the Director of Research and Investigation at Judicial Watch, namely a background in counterintelligence that, as a result of his service to our military in the United States Army. He is a graduate of its military intelligence officers' basic and advanced courses. And I see a lot of those skills being brought to bear in his day-to-day work these days. Chris Farrell, it is so good to have you with us. Welcome back to Secure Freedom Radio. It's been too long. I wanted to call attention particularly, Chris, to an extraordinarily important piece that you wrote the other day in the Daily Caller under the title, "The Left is Clearing a Pathway to Power." Now, as you know, we do what I call intelligence briefings here daily at Secure Freedom Radio, and we talk a lot about this, but I want you to just sort of walk our audience through what, on the basis of a trained counterintelligence officer, you're seeing in place now and being brought to bear against our republic in the form of these various groups that are operating in cities across this country, in some cases, destroying parts of them, in other cases, occupying parts of them. Who are these people, and what is motivating them, Chris?
Well, they're Marxists, if you want, a one-word answer, and they are engaged in subversion. There's a low-level insurrection underway, and it is a model of insurrection, again, with these Marxist roots, that is really sort of the action arm of what an Italian Marxist by the name of Antonio Gramsci had theorized and talked about, with this sort of, the long march through the institutions, the sort of eroding of all the principles or pillars of Western civilization in an attempt to capture language, to persuade the public, to erode confidence in the government and the Constitution. And you see increasingly hysterical words and deeds, and really craziness. I mean, that's just the vernacular expression of it, in an attempt to intimidate the public and to give a perception out there that everything is coming apart at the seams.
There are pieces of that I want to drill down on. It seems as though they're, of course, not just trying to intimidate the public. These folks are, palpably and successfully intimidating our political elites and leadership. And Chris, if what we're up against really is not just a low-level insurrection, as you put it, bad as that would be, but the first stages of really revolutionary activity, no longer sort of covertly marching through the institutions and converting them or subverting them or otherwise dominating them for the ultimate purpose of revolution, but actually moving into the overt revolutionary phase, maybe in a small way at the moment. But if that's the case, the absence of pushback from these intimidated elites and our institutions, for that matter, our law enforcement personnel and our FBI and so on, is a very ominous and almost, I'm sure, emboldening thing for those who are perpetrating such crimes, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, a parallel would be parents who, in a misguided way, ignore the outrageous conduct of their children, saying, "Oh, it's just a phase, they'll get over it," or "Johnny will eventually calm down," or "He'll get his act together." Well, at a certain point, Johnny doesn't get his act together and doesn't calm down. And, Johnny ends up doing something horrific.
Or Johnny may even take away from it that it's okay for him to be acting out, right? I mean, if you follow that analogy all the way through, what we're really doing is kind of signaling a tolerance for it. And that can only be emboldening to these characters, can it?
More than tolerance. It's enabling. I don't want to get too psychological on all this, but that's really part of what happens. And then the normal sort of guardrails on conduct, they get knocked down. So now the police are suddenly the problem. So you have a handful of bad actors or questionable circumstances about levels of violence and levels of force used in the apprehension of people engaged in criminal activity. And all of a sudden, the world gets flipped upside down. And now we're going to argue from the specific to the general. So because police officer A did something wrong, now we have to dismantle entire police departments because one person did something incorrectly or unlawful or whatever.
In a different state or municipality, for heaven's sakes.
Right. And so and arguing from the specific to the general is always wildly dangerous. And acting on that and making broad sweeping, when Congress is writing national legislation because a guy used a chokehold in Minneapolis, hold on a second. There's tons of law enforcement agencies with good guys and good gals doing all kinds of good stuff, and now we're gonna dismantle law enforcement because of the conduct of. Even if you say it's 1% or even 5% of law enforcement officers are using excessive force, that doesn't mean you destroy all of the police departments in the country because there's a handful of guys who are dirtballs. You just don't. No one operates that way. No one does.
Let me just ask you about something, and I don't mean to hoist you on your own petard here, but we have talked on this program before, Chris, about really serious problems with the FBI. And if anything, I think their absence from this scene, apart from, of course, looking massively into that noose hoax with NASCAR, which apparently, according to Tucker Carlson, required 15 different agents to get to the bottom of the fact that it was a hoax. But apart from that, they have been seemingly almost entirely absent from this. And some of the previous problems with it at the leadership level, to be clear, have prompted you to say, hey, we need to start over on the FBI. I think you've recommended using the Marshal Service as a new incubator for the kind of capabilities we need. So this isn't defunding the police, to be sure, and you're not talking about, doing this willy-nilly, but talk us through, Chris, why it's important to be restructuring in that case, even as we're resisting, I hope, these sweeping, ideas of change that the revolutionaries have in mind for the police establishments more generally.
Sure. Well, there's two things in play. One is the scope of authority of an organization like the FBI versus a city police department or a county sheriff's office, two wildly different scopes of authority. And then number two is established historical documented track record. And so in respect to the FBI, of course, they have enormous latitude and authority as a federal law enforcement agency and an intelligence agency both.
Which has been abused systemically for years now under the previous administration. Yeah.
Yeah, grossly. And then the flip side of that, or the polar opposite, is a police department in a municipality or a county sheriff's office that does not have nearly the authority or scope of a federal law enforcement and intelligence service, and nor do they have the same size force or financing or anything else. So they're two very, very different examples. Are they law enforcement? Sure, the way in which they operate and they're organized and they're funded are just wildly different.
So let me turn to a last question for you, Chris, because, again, I want to tap into your expertise as a counterintelligence professional. Do you see signs that foreign elements are involved in this revolutionary activity that's bursting forth on our streets at the moment?
I don't know why they wouldn't be. I mean, this is prime hunting ground for them. I mean, this is a dream come true. I mean, there are any number of foreign intelligence services who would love to get in the middle of this, and they can do it any number of ways. They can certainly do it in sort of an overt official way, but much more intriguingly and lower risk to them is to certainly have folks that they've recruited, and they can be everything from sort of card-carrying members to, the fellow travelers, cooperators types. And why wouldn't they want to get in the middle of it? This is deeply subversive. It destabilizes the country. It creates enormous mischief. It allows a political and a social leverage point for them. It contributes to their ability to conduct influence operations against us. It is a dream come true for any number of foreign intelligence services to get in the middle of this and just either have people with eyes and ears collecting and listening and watching, or overtly agitating. So this is it's a real threat.
Yeah, at a minimum, distracting us big time from what they're doing in, for example, the Chinese Communist Party's case, Hong Kong, and perhaps next Taiwan and elsewhere. And in addition to this, Chris, and we'll have to leave it at this, our colleague Trevor Loudon has been pointing out that there are at least two prominent Chinese Communist Party tied front organizations, Freedom Road Socialist Organization and Liberation Road, that have been intimately involved in, bringing about and promoting the work, for example, of Black Lives Matter. So could those connections be, in fact, operating? We need to look into this much more intensively. I hope that's one of the things you'll be doing at Judicial Watch. Chris Farrell, we appreciate you and your work tremendously. Come back to us with updates if you would.